Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the SOLGOLD PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all of the questions that are submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to CEO Daryl Kazubo. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Jake. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's presentation. My name is Daryl Kazuba. I'm the CEO and Managing Director of SOLGOLD. Today with me is Keith Pollux, our Interim CFO, and we also have Fazi Hanano, our Head of Investor Relations. It is our pleasure to be talking to you as we announce that we have entered into a definitive agreement to combine with Cornerstone to consolidate 100% ownership of the Cascabel project and to advance our position as the leading Ecuadorian copper-gold exploration and development company. We also want to talk to you today about funding, as we know that this is something that is top of mind. I'll just turn to slide 2. As we begin, I'd like to remind, just go back one, Fuzzy. I'd just like to remind everyone that today by our disclaimer and cautionary forward-looking statements, so please do take a moment to read them. Moving on to slide 3. This is a summary of the agreed terms of the transaction. Existing SOLGOLD and Cornerstone shareholders will own 80% and 20% respectively of the combined group. The exchange ratio of 15 SOLGOLD shares for each Cornerstone share is grounded by the relative contribution of each party. The ratio reflects a relatively neutral swap of Cornerstone's direct and indirect 20% interest in Cascabel combined with their exploration concessions for a 20% interest in SOLGOLD. We also have the optionality to pay up to 20% of the consideration in cash at SOLGOLD's election based on a 5-day volume-weighted average price closer to closing. The transaction is expected to close around December of this year, subject to Cornerstone shareholder approval and customary approvals for a transaction of this nature. Nearly half of the Cornerstone shareholders on a fully diluted basis have already entered into lockups in support of this transaction. There is no SOLGOLD shareholder vote required, with the consideration shares being issued under existing allotment authority, subject to the clearance of a prospectus with the UK Financial Conduct Authority, which is a customary process. SOLGOLD's board of directors can comprise up to 10 directors, 2 of which will be nominated by Cornerstone. We've been in discussion with Cornerstone on this transaction for some time with the view of maximising value for all of our shareholders with respect to the world-class Cascabel project. Bringing Cascabel under one roof simplifies our structure and opens up new avenues to enhance the value proposition for all of our stakeholders. In connection with the announcement of this transaction, we have launched a strategic review process to evaluate and pursue the best path forward for the combined group. The strategic review underpins our unwavering commitment to maximising value for all shareholders. We will explore various strategic and financing alternatives. The strategic review has already commenced. However, completion of the Cornerstone transaction is not contingent on the completion of the strategic review process. We'll just move to the next slide. We firmly believe this is the right transaction at the right time for both sets of shareholders. Cascabel is a tier 1 asset that will deliver copper when the world needs it most to enable a net zero emissions future. The recently completed pre-feasibility study based on the Apala underground demonstrates robust economics and is a first step towards multi-generational production from Cascabel. Consolidating 100% of Cascabel immediately simplifies our structure under the SOLGOLD banner, while making SOLGOLD more attractive to groups interested in getting involved with the Cascabel story. The new SOLGOLD is well positioned for revaluation and unlocking value for our shareholders. Turning to the next page. On a relative basis, it is clear that we trade at a discount to our peer group. Just getting to average would imply more than a doubling from our current levels. We are very focused on exceeding just the average, given we have a project of the tier 1 nature of Cascabel. We believe the cornerstone transaction, along with the strategic review process, sets the stage to unlock substantial value for our shareholders. Just moving to slide 6. Here we take a deeper look at the potential value of Cascabel based on current copper equivalent resources only. The chart here shows on a per share basis for the combined group, the value of Cascabel alone based on market precedents is significantly higher than our current share price for the entire portfolio of exploration and development assets. Cents per pound in the ground of copper is a key metric used by market participants to value copper development assets. On this basis, the value of the current resource at Cascabel represents multitudes of our current trading levels. At $0.06 per pound, that would imply an equivalent of approximately 78p per share for just Cascabel, which does not reflect any additional drilling on the prospective Cascabel concession. While we are constantly monitoring our share price, our efforts are squarely focused on ultimately maximising the value of our shares. A majority of our shareholders are significant holders that do not trade SOLGOLD shares on a daily basis. On average, over the past year, we have traded approximately 3 million shares daily. Relative to our shares outstanding, our trading volumes are relatively low, which is reflected in the volatility of our share price, as there are relatively few shares available to trade. With the cornerstone transaction consolidating Cascabel and the strategic review process, we're set on a path towards closing the implied value gap just based on Cascabel alone. But turning to slide 7. The strategic review process has already begun. We're looking at a number of available alternatives, including financing alternatives, including those that do not require the issuance of equity, a spin out of assets other than the Cascabel project to all shareholders, ongoing dialogue with strategic entities that can be sources of funding. Since releasing our pre-feasibility study, we've had a significant increase in interest from strategic entities. And there are other numerous alternatives, and we're under no pressure to chase suboptimal outcomes. Cornerstone and ourselves are working together to enhance value for the combined shareholder group. We're in a stronger position combined to work towards ensuring our shareholders are rewarded for their interest in a world-class tier 1 asset. At the appropriate time, we will update the market on the strategic review process. Let me now hand over to Keith to talk a bit about funding.
Thanks, Daryl, and thank you everyone for joining the call. I think from the outset, from a funding perspective, the merger with Cornerstone simplifies the story and provides greater optionality for SOLGOLD to deliver shareholder value. Cornerstone currently holds 6.8% or 157 million SOLGOLD shares, and they have already actively engaged with a number of parties to place these shares off market. So, subject to an acceptable price, this has the potential to raise over 30 million, which would be loaned to SOLGOLD ahead of transaction closing if required. So whilst the transaction cannot be guaranteed, and it is certainly not factored into the company's short-term funding strategy, we are confident that the strategic review can unlock near-term financing options that represent premiums to our market value today. This transaction also provides SOLGOLD with the uncommon ability to issue equity between signing and closing. As Daryl mentioned, strong interest in SOLGOLD assets remains despite the challenging market dynamics. We are also well progressed on the funding options, which we will share with the market as soon as we're able to do so. Daryl, back to you.
Thank you, Keith. Let me move on to our last slide, which really just concludes it. So let me summarize the rationale for the transaction. This combination is compelling on many levels and delivers benefits to both sets of shareholders. With this transaction, we're joining forces to consolidate Cascabel, a Tier 1 asset in Ecuador, which we believe is quickly emerging as the next destination for mining on a globally significant scale. We are creating a stronger company with increased optionality on the path forward to ultimately reward shareholders. We are the dominant copper-gold exploration development company in Ecuador, with our top priority being Cascabel. This merger only takes that further forward. We'll be carefully evaluating and pursuing strategic alternatives to create value for our shareholders and contribute to the advancement of Ecuador. Our capital markets profile will be enhanced with a simplified structure and aligned with all shareholders focused on maximizing value. And lastly, as Keith pointed out, this transaction has the potential to unlock short-term funds through the strategic placement of SOLGOLD shares held by Cornerstone. We're excited today and for what the future holds for SOLGOLD. Notwithstanding the current market volatility, this is the right time and the right transaction, bringing together Cascabel to chart the future for the company going forward. So let me stop there and open for questions, which Keith, Fazi and I would be very happy to take at this point.
Daryl, that's great, and Keith as well. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Daryl, Keith, as you can see, we have received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. So thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. Fazi, perhaps I could hand back to you just to chair the Q&A session with the team, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you everyone for joining us today and for the multiple questions that have been submitted. I'll start with these mostly in chronological order. First one is there an intention of paying the 20% portion of the acquisition in cash, and what does this decision hinge on? And in this context, does the management team intend to finance the execution of the business plan and feasibility study?
Yeah, so let me just, so just the first part of that question, Fazi. So the 20%, up to 20% cash is at SOLGOLD's election, and we will make that assessment. Keith mentioned that we're well progressed on a number of funding alternatives, and depending on where we land on that, we'll determine whether we use that 20% option or not. But we do think if we can, it's good for Cornerstone shareholders, plus it reduces dilution to SOLGOLD shareholders.
So Daryl, if I could perhaps just add to that. So as you mentioned, the cash toggle, if you like, provides SOLGOLD with additional optionality in relation to purchase consideration in terms of minimising the amount of share capital that we may choose to issue. And as Daryl mentioned, it's purely at the company's discretion, or at SOLGOLD's discretion.
Thank you, Keith. Next question is with regards to timing. Why acquire Cornerstone now if they would need to start contributing their share of project costs from the completion of the DFS in late next year? And following on to this question also regarding what happens to the debt-funded portion that Cornerstone has towards SOLGOLD currently.
Yeah, sure. So look, I think in terms of timing, so look, the benefit of this deal is a fewfold. One of those benefits, it gives SOLGOLD shareholders 100% access to the economics of Cascabel instead of 85%. And in terms of timing, as I mentioned, this transaction, combining the one group, simplifying our structure, it opens up alternatives, whether that be financing, bring in strategic entities. So I would say, given the sort of value that it will unlock, the sooner you do a transaction like this, the better. And I don't think, given its copper, given the tier 1 status of Cascabel, there will be an issue in finding the funding to support this project. Keith, do you have any additional comments?
Nothing to add. Thanks, Darryl.
The next, actually, there's a number of questions about the same topic. It's asking whether there have been any discussions prior or after the announcement of the transaction with our two major shareholders, BHP and Newcrest, and if what the feedback has been, and if they still intend to be supportive investors. Yeah,
look, I'm not going to talk on behalf of BHP and Newcrest, but they understand the transaction. I would like to think that all shareholders would see the value in consolidating the ownership of Cascabel, in simplifying that structure, and how it unlocks value for all shareholders.
Give me a moment as I go through. Here's the next question, stating that Cascabel is one of multiple prospects. Are we drilling at other properties, and how do we think of the overall value in the medium term?
That's a very good question. So SOLGOLD has 76 concessions in Ecuador, and only one of them is Cascabel, and those 76 concessions cover 3,200 square kilometres. So we know that given these concessions are on the Andean Copper Belt that supplies 40% of the world's copper production today, probabilities on our side that as we continue to drill, we find other economic deposits. But obviously, you need to find them. You need to put a resource estimate together, etc., in order for them to be valued. But when we talk about this proposition today, we're largely focusing on Cascabel, given that Cornerstone's interest in Cascabel was a 15% carried interest. With the combination, we're also picking up we're picking up Cornerstone's concessions through both Ecuador, including the JV alliance that they have with the state mining company Anami, and also a concession in Chile.
The next question is with regards to the right to appoint, to nominate directors to the board. The question being that Cornerstone will receive 2 board seats, but Cornerstone consists of a number of investors as well. So the question being around who will get these seats, and are there any lead shareholders that might be appointed to the board?
Yeah, look, so that's completely at Cornerstone's discretion. We have spoken to, we did a skills matrix review some time ago. We've shared that with Cornerstone, and they're taking that into consideration. But the nomination of directors, those 2 directors, is for them.
The next question relates to the strategic review, actually one of the points of the strategic review. And the question is, at what point does it make sense to split the company into one, a project company, and one, an exploration company?
Yeah, so that's a question I actually get asked quite a lot from shareholders. And look, so we need to assess that properly, right? So one side of the coin is that we don't get a lot of value for our exploration concessions, and if we separated the company into 2, that would be reflective of that. But I would also say that a number of parties are interested in us for both. They look at us and they see the value in Cascabel, but they also see that with our exploration concessions, we represent a future mining jurisdiction. So if you start to separate them out, you actually start to break up that value. As Cascabel's taken forward, you're developing relationships with the government, with the communities, you're building capability around the project, etc. And that all stands well to advance other projects in your pipeline. So we'll assess this from both perspectives. We'll engage with our shareholders on that, and in due course, share the outcomes of the strategic review.
The next few questions are all pretty much the same with regards to the announcement we had made last year on seeking partners, either for earnouts or JVs at some of our exploration properties. So a general question around, what is the progress here, as we have mentioned that there are interested parties.
Yeah, so we do. We have about 6 interested parties, which we're working through the concessions with. Some of those concessions we need to resolve, some challenges around permits, but we are working through that with a number of interested parties, and we'll continue to do so.
Slightly unrelated, but related from several investors is, will there be a change to the company name?
So I know that gets brought up a fair bit. We are focused on copper, but we reflect gold in our name. Look, the priority for us right at the moment is to close this transaction and pursue the strategic review, but am mindful that the name doesn't reflect our focus.
Next question is more related to funding. The question is, what is the current cash balance of SolGold, and at the current rate, by when do we need to raise funding? Maybe I could take this one, as we've already published our annual results last week. Our cash balance as of the end of June, which is last reported cash balance, is $26.1 million. As stated in our financial results, we have a runway until through to December, so that should correspond in terms of by when funding should be addressed. Anything to add?
Just like what Keith said, so obviously with this transaction we have an option here for short-term funding, but there are other options that are very well progressed, and we expect to be able to say something further on that shortly.
Next question is, what would BHP and Newcrest holding in the company be post the transaction, and does this allow them to increase their shareholding?
So with issuing 20% stock, a little bit over 20%, then you can see that existing shareholders get diluted by that amount, including BHP and Newcrest. It's up to BHP and Newcrest whether they buy on market, and that applies to any of our shareholders. We'll obviously be able to say more about what we're doing from a funding perspective shortly.
Yeah, I think, Daryl, just to address the question, as a result of this transaction, BHP's and Newcrest's shareholding is diluted by approximately 1.5% to 2%, and that is with the cornerstone shares that it holds in SolGold still on hand. So if those shares are sold, yes, it dilutes BHP and Newcrest by roughly 1.5% to 2%, this transaction. And it does not give them the ability to increase their holding through this transaction in any way.
Next question, slightly unrelated to the transaction itself, but also still relevant, is why the change in the CFO, and what is the timescale for the appointment of a new permanent group CFO?
Yeah, look, so I can't share too much in that. Obviously, a previous CFO left in July. Keith was very kind to join us. We've been going through quite an extensive selection process, and again, we'll be able to say more about that shortly.
Another question with regards to funding, more relating to cash burn. What is the current monthly cash burn, and do we intend to further restrain exploration capital in the regional portfolio?
Did you want to answer that, Keith?
Sure. Look, the rough monthly cash burn is about 3 to 3.5 million, and that's on the basis that we don't reduce exploration activities.
Next question is with regards to upcoming catalysts in the near term and medium term, with regards to both Cascabel and the regional projects. Question is here: are these still progressing, and what can we comment on these?
Yeah. So again, we presented a number of ideas that increase value of the organisation, and they're being progressed. In fact, we've been building out our management team, and that has brought fresh thinking and has just added to those ideas. And look forward to updating the market on that as they're evaluated.
Give me a moment as I get some more questions being compiled here. There's a few questions that relate to a tweet that was made by Deputy Mining Minister of Ecuador in the last week. The question is around with regards to the looking at a potential minority sale at the Cascabel level. Is there going to be any potential involvement of a Japanese company?
So I mentioned earlier that parts of the strategic review had already commenced some time ago, and that includes bringing in parties that are interested in taking a stake at the asset level, at Cascabel level. There's been a number of visits to Cascabel, of which one was tweeted. But this is one of the options that we're looking at. And look, this is organisations that could take a strategic interest at the asset level. We've had an off-taker come and visit the site as well. Every time interested parties visit the site, they get to see how tangible the planning is, how realistic it is, the relationship we have with the community, and we also, where they're interested, introduce them to the government so they can see firsthand sort of support that we enjoy from the government. So what was tweeted was just one example of what's going on at the moment.
Thank you, Daryl. Next question is, are we planning on spinning out any of the assets? And if so, do we have a timeline?
Yeah, look, so that is definitely part of the strategic review, as I alluded to. Not putting a timeline on it, but this is something that we want to progress relatively quickly. Again, we think that consolidating into one organisation, increasing our portfolio with the combined interests of the two organisations, it does give us more options. And one of those options is looking at spinning out some of our assets.
Next question is, what is the company and the board doing to address the SOLGOLD share price weakness?
Yeah, so this is a good example of that, right? So we're not exactly pleased with the share price performance. Market conditions are quite terrible. Also, we're very aware that there's this funding overhang, so very keen to address that in the short term. But look, this transaction is all about resetting the organisation, looking at what our strategic options are, and putting us on a different trajectory. That's why we're so excited to announce it, and why we've spent quite a number of months getting to this point.
Next question, maybe I could take that, is there a designated date for Cornerstone investors to hold shares to qualify for the SOLGOLD 15-for-1 exchange ratio? This should be a question directed at Cornerstone. They intend on releasing a circular and hosting an EGM for vote later in Q4. So you can get more information on deadlines from Cornerstone management. Next question, a little bit unrelated, but something that we've published earlier this year. Actually, several questions on that is, what is the latest with regards to the misappropriation of funds that we announced to the market in May?
Yeah. Did you want to talk to that, Keith?
Sure, I can talk to that. So that misappropriation has been fully investigated by independent third parties through several forensic investigations, and the company has taken steps to address the governance concerns around that, of course, and is looking at considering what follow-up action can be taken. But through the course of the audit and having a new auditor, those reports were fully investigated, and the corrective actions that we said we were going to take were monitored and substantiated as to whether that was the case. Sorry, Fauzi, did I answer the question? Could you just to make sure?
Yeah, I believe you did. The question was, well, there are multiple questions actually on this. Asking on the latest with regards to the actual misappropriation of funds. Actually, a follow-on of what is the progress in terms of retrieving any of the funds that were misappropriated.
So in terms of the progress, we are pushing recourse, but I can't specifically comment on the progress of that.
Thank you, Keith. Next question is with regards to the Cascabel studies. Any updates we can provide and color on the progress and the release of the studies, as well as with regards to the $1.8 billion of upside that had been guided previously?
Yes, this is what I referred to a little earlier, Fauzi. So there's a number of ideas, improvement ideas that go on top of the PFS that we presented back in April. They're being progressed. And as I mentioned earlier, we've, with the new management team coming on board that have actually, built and ran copper mines, they brought additional ideas to the mix.
Next question, actually quite a valid question. What is Plan B if Cornerstone shareholders don't approve the deal? Before turning that on to you, Daryl, just a quick reminder that we've received 47% on a diluted basis of support from existing Cornerstone shareholders, and the shareholder vote requires 2/3 of approval rate.
Yeah, plus, we have unanimous support from both boards for this deal. If you think about it, look, if it didn't go through, then obviously, we stay as separate entities. But I'd like to think that given, the support we already have, given the unanimous board support, I think that's highly unlikely. I think the other point here is, just let me finish the last point. And if you look at Cornerstone shareholders, they believe in the Cascabel project. They're familiar with the Cascabel project. This way, they get access, if you like, to 100% of the project going forward. So we are the natural parties to merge. Sorry, Keith, you were going to say something?
Yes, I was just going to say, Daryl, we have the customarily deal protection provisions in the agreement as well.
Yeah.
Next question relating to governance. Will the company stick by its commitment to put all directors up for election at the upcoming AGM?
Yes, that's right. So every time we've publicly presented, we've reiterated that commitment.
Next question is more related to Ecuador, and question is, is Cascabel affected by the recent talks between the Ecuadorian government and indigenous peoples regarding ancestral lands?
So the government released a few weeks ago, basically saying Cascabel and some other projects would not be impacted by this. If you look at the discussions going on with the Indigenous group, it's really around Indigenous participation, broader consultation, and also protecting special areas. If you look at Cascabel, we don't have Indigenous tribes on that around that mine site, and it's not in a protected or a special area.
Here's a broader question that SOLGOLD has missed several deadlines, self-imposed deadlines over the years. Why should investors have confidence in upcoming deadlines being met?
Yeah, it's a fair point. So I guess we did say back in December that we would deliver the pre-feasibility study in Q2 of this year, and we delivered it at the start of Q2. So we do take these commitments seriously. There's always times where things are a little bit out of your control, but when we make commitments, we make sure that we've thought them through, we've planned them so that we can deliver on them, particularly for the matters that are in our control.
Next question is with regards to the funding option as a result of the transaction. Does the placing need to be to a strategic investor, and are there any contractually commitments towards this or soliciting bids that have been coming in for the stake?
Did you want to talk to that, Keith?
Yes, sorry, Fauzi, I got a bit distracted. Repeat the question, please.
Yes, no problem. So the question is, does the placing of the shares that Cornerstone holds in SOLGOLD need to be to a strategic investor? And are we already, or are soliciting bids already being placed, or their contractual commitment towards this?
So it doesn't necessarily need to be placed with a strategic investor. It's open to all investors. There are no firm arrangements in place at the moment, but as I mentioned earlier, Cornerstone are already speaking to a number of parties in relation to placing those shares off market.
Question with regards, that's quite similar to one that we've answered before, but a little different, is what was the catalyst for SOLGOLD and Cornerstone to work out the deal in recent months? Who took the initiative?
Look, I would say, to be honest, both parties always saw that that we're more valuable combined than apart. Since joining the organisation, I remember first talking to Cornerstone, and they saw that, and we saw that on our side. So it's really just working through what an arrangement would look like that was good for both shareholders, and I think today is reflective of achieving exactly that.
A broader question, I'm not sure how we can answer this, we'll do our best, is when do you expect a re-rating as described in the slides to happen? Is it post-feasibility, development, production?
Yeah, look, that is a hard question to answer. I wish I knew. What we can do is focus on increasing the value of the organisation. So obviously, merging, simplifying our structure, doing the strategic review, really assessing all of our options. They're the things that we can control that make us more valuable. And I'm sure that as that is understood and digested by the market, it'll get reflected in our share price. I think,
and of course, they're all continuing to develop and de-risk the Cascabel project and exploration activities.
Yeah, for sure.
Question I can take here is more general. What percent of shares are held by individual investors? Currently, our register would indicate that there is close to 20% held by individual investors. Question on exploration. What's the latest on Porvenir and other priority concessions?
Yeah, so as soon as we've secured funding, we have 4 key targets outside of Cascabel that we want to ramp up exploration, and Porvenir is one of them. So we've obviously drilled out Porvenir for an MRE, but we believe in that concession there's other interesting anomalies that we want to drill out. Generally, what we see happening in our concessions is that we end up with a hub and spoke model. So, for example, we've got the Apella Underground, that is the hub. It'll have support infrastructure, the processing infrastructure, and then we'll have satellite mines such as Tandayama that support that hub. We suspect the same thing will happen at Porvenir.
Got another question which is asking, are there any standstills in place? I'm guessing you're probably referring to standstills that were in place previously. So BHP did have a standstill under its shareholder agreement that expired in October 2020. There are no other standstills in place on shares of SOLGOLD. Give me a moment to compile the last few questions. This one, I think, relates back to your answer now on Porvenir. What other concessions are being considered for development?
Yeah, so in terms of exploration targets, so we've got Rio Marilla, we've got Halipertos, we've got Chakal. So we've got 76 concessions, but there is 5 in particular we're keen on ramping up drilling on as we secure the next round of funding.
Another question that's coming here relates more back to the Franco-Nevada royalty that we have in place since May 2020. And the question is, are alternative funding options such as streams or royalties also potentially under consideration?
Yeah, Fuzz, I'd say everything is on the table. And we're assessing everything, particularly in these market circumstances. Everything's on the table as we assess what's best for our total shareholder set.
And I believe there's just one last here, just seeing what else has been already answered. Some more coming in. Okay, this relates more with regards to funding / the strategic review. What are the company's preferred way forward? Status quo, partial sale of Cascabel to use funds to explore other regionals. More general with regards to company strategy.
Yeah, so this is really the subject of the strategic review, right? So now that we're combining into one organisation, that frees up options. It makes us more attractive, from a financing perspective, from a strategic partner perspective. So that's why we're doing the strategic review now, which will assess the sorts of options that you're talking about, Fazi. For us, our focus was to close this transaction, which would enable us to do things more readily that we wouldn't be able to do pre this transaction while we were, had this complicating structure in place where Cascabel was split.
Question on what's the value of total historic expenditure incurred at Cascabel. This we can pull out from our annual results. Total spending in Ecuador is to the tune of about $350 million. That's within our annual results. There's several questions, just more of a repeat of a question that's been asked previously. Question more around timing and delivery of upcoming catalysts at Cascabel and Porvenir.
Yeah, so again, same thing. We're assessing those different options. We mentioned earlier on Porvenir, the PA is well underway. We've engaged M3 on that. And we'll release the results of that as the work's completed.
Next question, going forward, are asset sales preferred or joint ventures? I could probably answer that. This is all part of the strategic review, and as that progresses, the company will be updating the market with progress and decisions. When did the company do any drilling last? We are currently drilling at the Moran target that's within the Cascabel concession, and this lies about a kilometer or so to the north of Alpala. Here's a general question. What would be the overriding message to long-term shareholders?
Yeah, look, I think so. You should be excited, right? So again, because we're simplifying the organisation, it opens up options. It makes us more attractive. Should be excited because we're doing the strategic review. Since being in the role, a lot of the questions that I've been asked by shareholders are questions that we're answering as part of this strategic review. And the merged company really sets the scene for us to do that. I think the other thing too is, the current market conditions are pretty tough, particularly on juniors, non-producing juniors. But what drives our value in the medium term isn't the dynamics of the market today. What drives it is the structural deficit that's going to bite in the next few years. And secondly, the pipeline of projects of the scale of Cascabel is very bare. So projects like Cascabel will be in increasing demand as that structural copper deficit hits in a few years' time, really starts to bite, as the world wants to transition faster to a net zero emissions future. That is what will drive, SOLGOLD's value combined with the strategic review in the medium term.
Daryl, Keith, Fazi, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions that came in this afternoon. And of course, if there are any further questions that do make their way through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended for you to review, and then add any additional responses where it's appropriate to do so. Daryl, perhaps before redirecting those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Look, thank you again, everyone, for making the time. Like I said, we're very excited about today's announcement and what the future holds for SOLGOLD. This is the right time and the right transaction, bringing together Cascabel to chart the future for the company, your company, going forward. So again, thank you for your time, and look forward to engaging with many of you as we go forward. Thank you.
Daryl, that's great, and Keith and Fazi as well. Thank you very much indeed for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This may take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of SOLGOLD PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.